It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast world editor Nico Hines joins us from London. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening as well to Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine. How's your week been?
Very good.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's Friday.
Elisabeth Pinault, political correspondent for the Reuters news agency. Has your week been very good?
It's been incredible. It's been intense. It's been interesting. And the first day was crazy.
Crazy. We're talking, I think, about pension reform, which we'll get to in a little bit.
I was at the National Assembly, I can tell you.
On Thursday, it was raucous. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet is a commentator, political consultant. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, François. I had a good week.
You had a good week.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's changing. It's a different landscape. We are back with politics, you know.
Politics is back, at least in France.
Politics is back.
By the way, you can listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Accidents can happen, goes the song, but for the Pentagon, the Russians tempted fate when they first dumped fuel on a U.S. Reaper drone Tuesday and then clipped the unmanned surveillance crafts. The dueling narratives going into overdrive after that incident.
And the United States will continue to fly and to operate wherever international law allows. And it is incumbent upon Russia to operate its military aircraft in a safe and professional manner.
The Americans persist in saying that they are not involved in the fighting. Here is a new proof that they are directly involved.
Let me give you Vivian Walt. This isn't the Cuban Missile Crisis. Right now, the U.S. is not treating this as a full-on aggression. They weighed their words carefully. What was your reaction when you first saw this, though?
I mean, I think that, you know, as has happened on a few instances over the last nearly 13 months of this war, of this phase of the war, shall we say, there is always this kind of feeling that anything could kind of tip it over the edge and that it wouldn't take much. Here you have a Reaper that is basically a drone that's equipped to do either surveillance or attack. It happened not to have been armed, but it could have been armed. They fly Reapers over the Black Sea all the time. So it's highly possible that something like this, as you said, could have been way worse.
And what's the calculation on dumping that fuel on it before it gets clipped there?
You know, who knows how high up that decision went? I mean, given that this is the Russian military we're talking about, one has to imagine that it was approved from pretty high up, but maybe not. Maybe it was some crew that simply just got, you know, the hell in and wanted to, down this drone. Maybe they really did have a strategy that they wanted to bring down a drone. They wanted to kind of send a message to the Americans and possibly recover the drone and examine what its capabilities are.
And Nico Hines, you heard in that clip the Russians saying, see, this isn't a war with Ukraine. This is a war between superpowers.
Yeah, well, this is the line they've been pushing since before the war even broke out. I say broke out, before Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Putin was already pushing the line that it was the US that had forced him to do it. Obviously, that's ludicrous, but, you know, it's the sort of thing we expect. And I think this kind of incident probably does play quite well back home. You can see straight away that it's become a sort of propaganda tool from both sides. And Shoigu, the defense minister, was busy, or has already been busy, I think it was this morning, awarding special medals to the two pilots who downed this drone, even though it seems at best it was a somewhat muddled mission. We're not quite sure what they were trying to do. I think the American response has been quite carefully calibrated to be extremely rude while also downplaying the significance. They called it profound incompetence. And I think what we've basically got at the moment is a sort of troll war as both sides try to rile the others up with these propaganda actions whilst simultaneously downplaying it so we don't get any serious hot repercussions.
Because the U.S. also has to manage its own allies in all of this, some who are more hawkish than Washington. Slovakia pledging a fleet of 13 MiG-29 Soviet-era warplanes to Ukraine this Friday. This hot on the heels of Poland, which also pledged 4 on Thursday.
These jets are in their final years of service, according to their technical possibilities. But they are in most cases still in good working condition. Initially, within the coming days, we are handing over 4 planes to Ukraine, all in full working condition. The other planes are being serviced and prepared and will be gradually handed over.
So, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, it's Washington has to, at the same time, contain Russia and manage allies who wanted to go further.
Yeah, he's piloting the whole strategy, basically. He's giving orders. He's trying to discipline everyone. And what we see is clearly a confrontation between two blocks. So the US must control their own bloc, so to speak. And we see tendencies to go further than the US would, but we also see other tendencies that are more careful about it. Like France, for instance, is not going full speed in the war, so we've got a mixed landscape in Europe, and the US has to do with that mixed landscape between countries that are fully afraid that Russia would go further than Ukraine, and France, who is, a little bit more careful, a bit more scared, and we don't want to go too far. And this drone incident, for me, it's pure communication. It's only a way of saying we could go further, so watch out. That's exactly what Putin has been playing since the beginning. If you provoke me, I will go further. That's exactly what he wants to achieve. He wants to, his own strategy is to have a propaganda on the social networks of people saying this might be World War III, so we should not back up Ukraine too much because, I don't want my world to end.
But we've sort of seen this game of chicken before. This is the Black Sea. We saw it with Zaporizhzhia over the nuclear power plant. We may see it again. Elisabeth Pinault, it's true that a lot of this is playing out on social media.
Yes, it's true. It reminds us how dangerous the world is at the moment, and especially in Europe. And this reminds me of the incidents that we had a few months ago with this bomb that exploded in Poland. And within 2 hours, we say, will the NATO intervene or not? What will happen? So that was a very dangerous point. So any time, any day, something like that can happen. And then we need to be aware of a danger.
The West shoring up its support as Russia rallies its allies. This Friday, Beijing confirming next week's visit by China's president to Moscow. It'll be 3 days, starting with an informal dinner Monday evening with Vladimir Putin. Vivian Walt, this three-day meeting can be read one of two ways. China going all in on the side of the Russians, but it's also claiming that it's speaking to the Ukrainians, and there will be a phone call between Xi Jinping and his Ukrainian counterpart.
Well, if you remember the last meeting between Putin and Xi, Putin did not at all get the kind of response that he was looking for. In fact, Xi had effectively told him to cool it and to stop, provoking World War III, essentially. Now, it is quite clear that there's sort of a reordering of the global, spheres of influence and, blocks of allies. And from the start, Russia and China have been fairly aligned, along with all of their allies in the rest of the emerging world. And don't forget that President Macron is going to Beijing in 2 weeks' time. He's going the very next week, I believe. So you have a lot of high-level political maneuvering here. and possibly towards trying to figure out an exit plan in this war.
Nico Hines, you mentioned that measured response by the U.S. to the drone attack. The U.S. also with a measured response to this visit, saying it's a good thing if China is promoting dialogue, much as they said it was good that China was promoting dialogue between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, the US is really trying to keep everyone sweet, lots of sugarcoating going on. I don't think there's any way of interpreting this trip other than to say it's a show of support for Putin. I mean, for anyone to choose to go to Moscow while the Kremlin is orchestrating, you know, the biggest land invasion in Europe since the Second World War is, you know, there's no way around the fact that that is a huge show of support to make out that Putin is still part of the international community and that you're treating him with all respect and reverence of a normal, non-illegal warmonger. So I don't think there's any way around that. However, it's true that, you know, China is emerging as a potential power who can sometimes help to resolve issues. You know, we've become used to this unipolar world where America is the world's policeman and it's left to them to sort everything out. And Beijing wants to make it clear that they can be trusted by countries around the world too, and that perhaps they may even be seen as a less controversial kind of figure in these debates, in these discussions, in these peace talks, and maybe indeed it will ultimately be Beijing or someone, a kind of coalition of countries that include Beijing perhaps, that do help broker some sort of agreement between Russia and Ukraine. That's a long way away, but maybe at some point in a year or so it will be something like that happens.
All right. It's going to be a big week again next week for diplomacy. It could be a big week again for banks. This one was brutal. Credit Suisse falling sharply again on Friday, despite a respite when Switzerland's central bank stepped in on Thursday. Flashbacks to the 2008 financial crisis began last week when two mid-sized U.S. banks failed. Silicon Valley banks, tech startup investors getting a bailout so they could pay their staff on time. The Biden administration wary of how previous bailouts fueled rage against Wall Street elites.
We felt that there was a serious risk of contagion that could have brought down and triggered runs on many banks, and that's something, given that our judgment is that the banking system overall is safe and sound, depositors should have confidence in the system, and we took these actions.
So we had a day of calm, Elisabeth Pinault, and now this Friday, banking stocks, and not just little banks, big ones too, are down.
Yes, there is this big fear of another financial crisis all around the world. And very quickly, the French authorities had to reassure everybody. And Bruno Le Maire said that, you know, the bank's finance system is fine. But Emmanuel Macron yesterday, when he justified the law, he said that he would not vote the reform, the pension reform in France. He justified that by saying that there were financial risks. So I think that could be linked to all that, with a world atmosphere of fear around the finance.
Yeah, we saw another half-point rate hike by the European Central Bank on Thursday. Was what was expected and everything. But there is this feeling when you look at this, Vivian Wald, why wasn't the financial sector more aware? Inflation's been around for months. It's not something that's all of a sudden.
You know, I see it a little bit differently. It seems to me there's a big element of this which is psychological rather than actually about like dollars and cents or euros and cents. You had basically a panic run on Silicon Valley Bank. These banks are pretty well capitalized. It's not like they have nothing in their coffers. They did take a $2 billion loss. It wasn't very much compared to what they actually had in terms of, you know, customers' deposits in the bank. The problem is that in the age of like social media, any kind of announcement like that has the potential to create this totally overblown sort of panic run on the bank. And I think that this is really a problem for a number of banks. They're going to have to recalibrate how they message, what they're doing.
Message what they're doing, but still, they bought bonds at a low interest rate that they then were laden with and didn't know what to do with. And that's what...
That's true. They didn't really... Look, the Fed has been raising rates, many would say, way above the level at which they need to do so. I mean, inflation has come down already, way down. Commodities are way down. The price of gas is way down. And yet the Fed keeps raising rates. It's been very focused on this whole issue of inflation to the exclusion, in some ways, of all the other risks.
And Fiedmore Chevrolet, it's become political because everybody remembers 2008, the resentment at the time against bailouts for banks. We even had potential U.S. Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis accuse Silicon Valley Bank of being a woke bank because it subscribes to these, social ethics in its human resources department that most big corporations have these days. Wokeism making its way into an argument about financials.
Yeah, they could do that, Republicans. They are very Trumpians now. And Trump could win, by the way. So they are not out of Trump. They are fully Trumpized. I don't know if you can say that. They are fully Trumpized. So they tend to blame the woke and the wokes and the wokeism for everything that goes wrong. And the lack of, reading the Bible is the cause of everything, according to DeSantis. But I wouldn't care too much about that. But they could make it a political thing that could harm the resolution of the problem, as they usually do, the Republicans, whenever a virus comes away, or anything else that could harm the population. They would split it and divide it and make it a fully political thing with no logic at all.
Do you feel, Elisabeth Pinault, that there is still the ghost of 2008?
Oh, yes, of course. It's not a long time ago. And there's still inflation. Life is hard. People are worried. There is the war, there is inflation. And now the fear of a political crisis, of a financial crisis. So I think that's a lot. And really the authorities have to make everything to avoid a kind of panic, which is always very dangerous. In Europe, they really have to be careful. They know it. But I think that people are really, really concerned, and they follow it very closely.
The Commerce Department in the U.S. announcing this week that year-on consumer spending up 6%. That's still pretty high. Inflation has been around for months, and so have strikes, by the way. The British government offering the healthcare sector a 5% wage increase for nurses, paramedics, midwives, not junior doctors, however. We saw a big day of strikes over in the UK, Nico Hines, this week. It's almost the first day of spring. Has this been the winter of discontent because of inflation that many had predicted?
Yeah, I mean, we're always put in the shade by you guys, these scenes of kind of huge French reactions.
We'll get to that in a moment.
Macron's policies and stuff kind of rather put us in the shade. Yeah. But by our standards, it has been a pretty wild few months. I mean, just this week, my kids weren't allowed to go to school. My wife wasn't able to get to work because the tube was closed. The schools were closed. Non-emergency operations in hospitals were closed. You had the rail workers, the doctors, the nurses, the teachers all out on strike at the same time. And this was not coordinated strikes. This was because they're all having their own individual battles to get the pay rises that they need to keep up with this inflation. And the monster of inflation, which continues to spiral out of control, which is why we're getting these interest rate rises to try and calm that. It's very interesting to see how that's having then knock-on impacts with the banking sector and other parts, because whenever you fiddle with one area of the economy, you're tickling something else, you're having unintended consequences here and there. But certainly, this government is looking very, very beleaguered now as it's coming under attack from the most cherished parts of the country. You know, everybody here trusts their teacher and their doctor, and more importantly than that, they trust their global football icons. And Gary Lineker last week has become the patron saint of proving that strikes do work. You know, he was forced to be suspended. All of his colleagues came out on strike immediately, and within 3 days, he had won his battle against the BBC, and which was being encouraged by the government. So I think everybody over here is feeling encouraged, and that strikes are going to work. The government seems to be crumbling a little bit on these debates about pay now. Offers are starting to come in. So I think it's going to keep on rolling, and the government's going to have to pay up.
Yeah, the strikes appearing to work with particularly with those healthcare sector workers and with Gary Lineker. From industrial action across the channel to near open revolt, France's president railroading through his unpopular pension reform bill on Thursday, but at what cost? The left wing of the French parliament singing the national anthem, the prime minister tasked with telling the National Assembly the government would trigger what's called Article 49.3 of the Constitution, turning the vote on pensions into a decree and a vote of confidence in the government. In the end, the prime minister admitted as much at the rostrum. She was no longer sure that she had the votes.
Today, we are faced with uncertainty that hinges on a few votes. We cannot take the risk of 175 hours of parliamentary debate collapsing. On the basis of Article 49.3 of the Constitution, I engage the responsibility of my government on the pension reform bill.
Elisabeth Pinault, Parliament's been often accused in the past of being a rubber stamp institution. It certainly was not the case on Thursday. You were there.
Yeah, I was in the room when Elisabeth Borne was speaking, and that was very impressive. I had never seen that, and people there have never seen such a mess, really. Because when you were in the room, you couldn't hear her at all. On TV, you can have the microphones, but in the room, you just heard the cries, the national anthem. You could see the shouting, saying demission, resignation. So that was very messy and very shocking in a way to see such a mess in the National Assembly. Yeah, in a way, because it's the president couldn't say a word. You know, maybe he should.
The Speaker of the Parliament.
The Speaker of Parliament, yes, la présidente Yael Braun-Pivet, and yeah, that was very impressive. But in the end, the government chose not to have this vote. It was his choice. It's considered as a demonstration of force, of something unfair and undemocratic that a lot of people, and we've had the first polls about this decision saying that more than 8 out of 10 people are unhappy with the government decisions of not having a vote, and more than 65% want strikes and protests to continue. And the big difference is that for weeks there have been peaceful demonstrations against these pension reforms, and there is beginning to have violence. We've had violent images that, like you're showing here, like fires, like and demonstrations all around the country last night and maybe tonight. So it's worrying. It reminds us of the beginning of the Yellow Vest crisis in 2018.
Let's talk about that vote for a second and why it was so raucous inside of Parliament. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. We had a panelist last night as it was all unfolding saying it's legal, it's in the Constitution what happened, but it also feels to citizens like a denial of democracy. Should it really, though? I mean, was the 100th time that this Article 49.3 had happened, where it's kind of a reverse of a veto, right? You turn a bill into a vote of confidence.
But the main argument, the Macronists' main argument, is to say that one former Prime Minister, Michel Rocard, who was a socialist, did use that Article 49.3 like 28 times. But the main difference is he was widely popular. And the measures he passed that way were popular at the time. This measure is rejected by 80% of the population, including on the right side, including amongst the allies that Macron could have on this measure, including in his own party. Some of his own MPs didn't want to vote for that measure. And this is the fact that there was no debate about something that is major for the French population. We're talking about retirement pensions. It's our future, the future of our kids, and we couldn't even have a public debate about it. Not really. The unions
Would it have been
unions
different?
were united for the first time in our recent history.
Would it have been different if Emmanuel Macron had sort of prepared public opinion, had said, we may be going for this Article 49.3, we may turn this into a decree.
Sure.
Whereas he seemed to hedge his bets. There was a crisis meeting at the presidential palace just hours before.
There were 3 meetings yesterday morning.
Yeah.
Everything is messy about that pension.
Why?
reform
Why is it so
measure.
messy?
Because they are improvising. We don't even know why.
Improvising.
We don't even know why he wanted that measure so much. We don't even know why. There was no explanation about it. It was not solved properly from the beginning. It was exactly like Putin with the Ukraine war. Okay, something that was decided by one person, imposed on everyone else, and no explanation was provided at the beginning. That's the best thing to do if you want something to be rejected widely. You don't get popular by deciding all alone that something will be done, not explaining why really, being contradictory about it for weeks, and then pushing it through force on the country. I mean, who does that? A president shouldn't do that. A president shouldn't do that. That's the main feeling we have. We want to remain a democracy, and that is what is at stake. Because I'm sorry, just one moment more. In 2027, in 2027, we could have Marine Le Pen elected as president.
The far-right leader.
It's the main possibility so far. She will be given that kind of power, okay? Override the parliament, the majority of the French population, all the unions, even people in his own side, the president can override all that and impose his own thing, whatever the consequences are, okay? If she's elected, imagine what she can do. I mean, that's the main fear I have personally.
Is there a method to Macron's madness, Vivian Walt?
I totally agree. I mean, I'm just going to
dear.
repeat what's just being said. But Macron has surprisingly really failed in terms of the kind of nitty-gritty politicking that you need to do in run-up to a big vote like this. This is supposed to be a kind of legacy-making measure that he's going to push through Parliament or get through Parliament. And as far as I know, there was very little done in order to prepare the country. I mean, this is the president that went right around the country having a great debate on all these issues.
Which the French liked, and this was in the wake of the Yellow Vest movement.
And did quite a lot, I think, to diffuse the Yellow Vest movement at that time. But in retrospect, maybe the Yellow Vest movement simply took a breather for COVID and never really went away. And unfortunately, I think Macron has lost a lot of ground. Of course, he's not going to be, there's not going to be new presidential elections. Not like he's going to leave the Élysée. He's got 4 long years to build his legacy. The real problem, as we just said, is who comes next. And the real winner out of this whole debacle over the last couple of months is Marine Le Pen and the far right.
Those images we're seeing, Nico Hines, a second night running, people rallying across from Parliament in the heart of Paris. Those are people from the left. The far right, which is the greatest number of, if you count them by party, the greatest number of opposition MPs, their leader is hammered home a message this week, Marine Le Pen, of this is wrong, but see you at the polls in 2027. Your thoughts?
Well, what's amazing is Macron seems to have really united the nation here. You know, we've got Philippe there in the studio comparing Macron to Vladimir Putin. I was listening to the global juggernaut New York Times daily podcast yesterday, and who should pop up? A little voice in the distance there, Francois, questioning whether this might be the end of France as we know it. And I think this strength of feeling that's coming from all quarters of French society must have caught Macron by surprise, because we all know that he's an arch strategist and that he will have been thinking about, you know, it's ridiculous we're talking about his legacy 1 year into his second term, but he will have been thinking about how this is going to play out over a long time. And he obviously thought if he could rush this through early on, then he would have time to work on other policies and for people to forget how divisive this was. But he's in real danger now of losing his legitimacy and therefore losing the power to control what is passed over the next few years. And if this continues to spiral, it looks like Macron's going to quickly become a lame duck. And then, yes, that's the perfect conditions that people like Le Pen have been dreaming of.
The headline in one of the articles on the news website Mediapart, calling this the because of Macron being term limited, the first day of the end of his mandate, even though, again, that election's in 2027. Elisabeth Pinault, of course, a lot of it could hinge on what happens on Monday. This vote of no confidence, right now it seems as though he's got the votes, that he'll be able to override it. Could we have surprises Monday?
I don't think so. Well, it's very unlikely. But still, there will be a vote. So at least we'll have a vote. And they count on this to end the resentment and demonstration, but it won't be enough. Of course, the president is weakened. And this whole episode has been very badly prepared, bad communication, no explanation, and resentment that is now anger. And you have a divided France between the France that is okay, that has got a job with an economy that is rather healthy, and another part of France that feels totally denied, that feels abandoned by the power. And this half France is worrying, and as you said, and Marine Le Pen is the winner of all that, and she did nothing really. She didn't really went into the debate about the pensions, but she said she does nothing, but she gains credibility, she gains respectability, and she's closer to power now. Yes.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet mentioning how unions are united, which is often a rarity here in France. And we saw more demonstrations this Friday in cities like Rennes, in Brittany, Marseille, in the south. You saw those images as well from Paris. Here in Paris, there's also been pickets that have been going on for 11 days by garbage workers. You can see picketers outside of the big incinerator in the southeastern suburb of Ivry. It's also, by the way, this one's also a bit of a showdown between the president and the mayor of Paris. Socialist Anne Hidalgo refusing to order sanitation workers to return to their jobs. The Interior Minister saying the government would requisition the bin men. Good luck with that, say interested parties.
They can requisition me, but to do what? They will make me do what? To go out? I'll go out, but that's it.
I can tell you clearly that if they requisition me, the truck will barely get started. The engine will stay cold. I will go at my own pace. I'm the driver, so I set the pace.
Vivian Walt, do you find yourself having to hold your nose when you cover this story?
Yes. I mean, Paris has certainly looked a total mess. There's no doubt about it. You don't have to venture very far from your house, no matter where you live, within the 20 arrondissements of Paris to really see that there's a problem here. And I mean, yes, I think they will clear the garbage, but that's the more visible problem.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, the fact that the garbage men went on strike, it's one of the few strikes that's actually been a rolling strike. The others have been sort of punctual days of action, like the one we're going to see next Thursday.
And it's what is remarkable is that it's highly visible. It's really an inconvenience. People are forced to see that the garbage is at their door. So it's a symbol of, everything that is going wrong when garbage starts to pile up.
And the mayor of Paris, because she got less than 2% in the presidential election, she ran as a socialist.
She wants to be even more socialist than she ever was. She's more socialist now than she ever was.
Is she going to regain some of her popularity?
She tries to. I don't know if she would succeed, because on some level, people will resent her as much as they resent Macron about that strike. So it's difficult to know. And the government has played quite well by rejecting the responsibility of the crisis on her shoulders. And this was mainly led by the three contenders inside the government that wants to take Anne Hidalgo's place as mayor of Paris. So there is political play too. What we see as Parisian is that on the Instagram, for instance, we see many rerun of Emily in Paris, but with a different background, with all the garbage piling up. So it's bad for our image. At some point it has to stop. And but when you take your children to school, that's my case in my arrondissement. We have to go between two huge piles of garbage, and it's a bit shocking. And that's that strikes the French elite, because only the elite live in Paris now. So that's a targeted strike, and that's good. That on some level, that's good that even the elite has to suffer from this whole situation.
The garbage workers live in the banlieue.
Exactly,
the garbage workers live in the banlieue.
So this is a socially meaningful thing.
We haven't heard from the president. He's been silent on pension reform mostly. Instead, this week, he spoke out Wednesday at a kind of, I guess you could call it a pep rally for civil servants to mark 500 days to go till the Olympics. Speaking of which, the president retweeted the cover of Time magazine. Vivian Walt spoke with the engineers and organizers working to make good on the age-old promise of making the River Seine fit for the long-distance swimming events and the aquatic portion of the triathlon. Less than 500 days to make good on, I remember 1990, that promise by then President Jacques Chirac that in 3 years' time he would swim in the Seine. What happened with that?
As far as we know, and I did look, as far as we know, he never set foot in the river.
No.
Although my editors did ask me, are you sure he never set foot in the river? There's no record of him
there
ever
is no. I
doing
can
so.
assure you there is no record of that. We would remember.
Yeah.
It would be dead. I think it would be dead.
It's fascinating, though. Do you think they're going to win their bet to make the Seine clean?
This was actually a very key part of the Olympic bid. When Paris put together its bid, which it won back in 2016, one of the key things they promised was that people would be able to swim in the Seine in the middle of Paris. We're not talking way out in Normandy, in the middle of Paris. And there are 4 Olympic events that are set to begin under the Alexandre III Bridge in the middle of Paris. So far, so good. They claim that they have everything under control. They did allow me to go underground to see this gigantic storage tank that
Did you swim?
building.
Did you swim in the Seine? No,
Not yet.
not that confident.
Nico Hines, you're a swimmer. Would you come test the waters?
Yeah, as soon as Viv goes in there, I will be next in after her, I promise.
All right. Fluctuat nec mergitur. That is the motto of the city of Paris. She is tossed by the waves, but she does not sink. And you see by the map that's in your article there that water runs through the capital. And Elisabeth Pinault, it's an old chestnut, French politicians promising that the Seine will be swimmable.
Yes, well, we need to explain that it's going to be like swimming pools with clean water into the Seine. We need to explain that. So this is possible. This is much more makeable.
River water.
River water, and it already exists every summer in the Canal Saint-Martin. You can bathe into the water, into the from the river. So it's not so difficult to make those kind of pools on a small level.
On a small level, whether it works on a bigger one, we shall see. Top of the issues, by the way, that have Parisians grumbling over the games are the ticket prices. A first lottery-drawn sale of online tickets proved very pricey, sometimes exorbitant, far from the promise of 1 million tickets at 24 euros each, more than 4 million for less than 50 euros. The French don't feel like it's coming out that way.
I would have been tempted, not at this price.
Prices are crazy and it's turning into a business. I'm finding the Olympic spirit isn't there anymore.
Now, there's a second lottery of tickets coming out, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. People have said here, oh, it's the same as the prices for London, but actually that's not true. It is more expensive.
It's very expensive. It's sometimes several hundred euros for a competition that you don't really care about because you can't really pick whatever you want to see. I think Vivian has a more direct experience of it. You subscribe to the lottery, right?
I did, actually. And, I wound up being picked very early. I think I was picked in the first draw for this lottery.
But not only you, your husband?
My husband too, and my son. So 3 of us, and all of us spent hours trying to figure out how to get tickets. And none of us did, ultimately. You had to buy 3 different sports, and there were, basically sports you didn't care about. Of course, everybody wanted to see beach volleyball under the Eiffel Tower, or they want to see, people diving into the Seine, by the way. But those were totally unavailable, and so none of us wound up with tickets to anything.
And that's the most common experience. And the other guys have the experience that it's way, way too expensive.
Is the difference, Nico Hines, that today we're in a much more digital age than before? Online lotteries to get picked, to be one of the ones that when the window of opportunity comes can get those tickets. You didn't have that in London in 2012.
We did have a fiendishly complex system as well. I can't quite remember. I think what you had to do was to apply for everything you might want to go to. So I think I applied for like 40 events or something, and then you just got whatever you got. And I did end up getting the beach volleyball Horse Guards Parade, which was quite a spectacle, even though obviously I'd rather have been there to see Usain Bolt in the 100 metres. And of course, those tickets didn't come my way. I think, a lot of I don't think there's any excuse for putting the prices up. You can't just blame it on demand. This is what we've been seeing in the entertainment industry as well, that there's this kind of new concept of dynamic pricing where they're trying to use the principles that airlines and hotels have been using for decades to try and make really sought after tickets, when they become scarce, suddenly shoot the prices up. But that's just massively, massively unfair. You know that these things are going to be oversubscribed from the outset, so they should be set at a reasonable price. There's absolutely no reason to be price gouging from the average Parisian punter who wants to go and see the sport in their city, because at the end of the day, most of the money for these things is not coming from small ticket buyers. It's coming from these huge companies that are doing the sponsorships and these massive global international TV deals. There's absolutely no excuse for ripping off the punters.
Yeah, and we've seen it, as you say, this dynamic pricing, which has triggered blowback now from rock icons. After the outrage of Taylor Swift fans, ticketing giant Ticketmaster forced to refund $10 to fans who bought the cheapest tickets to The Cure's U.S. tour, $5 to everyone else after pressure from lead singer Robert Smith. The Cure had wanted Elisabeth Pinault to have $20 tickets so that, like Nico says, it could be a more democratic event. Is sports and entertainment the reserve of the rich nowadays?
Well, it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, the French authorities have to be very careful about that because they want the Olympic Games to be popular. All eyes on Paris now and until the Olympic Games. So French authorities have to be very careful. They said that half the tickets, and there's going to be, I think, 13 million tickets sold. Half of the ticket will be less than 25 euros. That's what they promised. For it has to be that way. And I saw that there were tickets for the opening ceremony that could go up to $3,000, 3,000 euros. So that's if they want it to be popular, the way they want it to be, if they want to have a good image of Paris, which is full of garbage these days, they have to do something about the ticket, because all eyes are on us now.
Otherwise, there might be a revolt.
Otherwise, the image of France will be
playing to
damaged.
Elisabeth Pinault, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, Vivian Walt, Nico Hines in London. Thank you for joining us here for The World This Week.